I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zeiss Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Alright, everybody, welcome once again to GM Tools Mysteries and Investigations. Linda and I are going to tell you all sorts of tips and tricks that we've used in our games and that we've seen in published adventures that Linda has worked on or not, to make sure Mysteries and Investigations are fun and rewarding for your entire group, rather than what they can be, which is unfortunately they can wind up being a frustrating slog where everyone gets upset, or the mystery of suddenly it's solved immediately. So there are a lot of tips you can use to prevent either of those two bad cases and instead walk a path that helps you out to have a fun game. That's what this episode is all about. So I would say the top tip for Mysteries Investigation, before we even get into how to run a mystery and investigation, is something that we talked about in the New Beginnings episode, which is you need to talk to your group. Because the way that your group feels about mysteries and investigations, or puzzles, or anything where in character they're gonna sort of use their smarts to figure something out that's going on, is gonna vary possibly quite dramatically among different groups of players, and you need to figure out what the overall desire is from your group. And by the way, the answer might be that they say, sorry, I know you watched an Arcade Mark episode about this, but we hate mysteries and investigations anyway. No matter what you do, we don't want it. You might be able to convince them, but you should listen very carefully if they say that, because you're fighting an uphill battle. But understand what people want from mysteries, and sometimes they don't know, so you need to know how to couch the question, how to ask the question to them to get the results you need. And one way you could potentially do it is almost by having them sort of try to fill the shoes or imagine the situation. Yes, Night Trace is right. Coach the players by couching the question. So, for example, there are some players who absolutely want to figure everything out on their own, and once you've given the initial clues, they do not want the GM to come in and either ask them to roll some kind of a check, or other tips that we might be saying down the line, having an NPC try to give something that's just a little bit of a hint, or even just, we're going to give some tips. Some players don't want those tips. They just want to be left alone, and they feel like you're cheating, or that you're making them feel like less of a problem mystery puzzle solver if you help them out with that. Some players, on the other side, do want to be engaged in the mystery, but they want a little bit of nudging so that they feel like they're always making forward progress and momentum. And they might be in the same group and you have a problem because one person wants to keep going and the other person like, no, let me do this. That could be an issue. And then, of course, there's some people who are fine having a mystery in the adventure, but as we mentioned in the other episode when we briefly touched on this, they're like, well, you don't make me swing a sword when I declare my attack roll. My character is very smart. I should just roll an intelligence check and solve the mystery. So there are more than those. Those are just 3 examples that we mentioned last time and that I therefore remembered. Linda, can you think of any other basic archetypes of things that players might want?
Those are sort of some basic player archetypes. You also have the extent to which players will keep track of the information that they're given. It's often useful to have some aids for that. One thing that I think is important to bring up here too is sort of the elephant in the room when you start off with, hey, make sure that you know your players in advance and can play your mystery and everything like that, is what happens when you are running, say, an organized play scenario and the adventure itself has this run as written ethos to it.
Or you're writing or developing
an adventure. So, or for organized play or an adventure path or some kind of published adventure. So, in general, with creating those sorts of things, we're shooting for sort of a middle ground with best practices and a lot of different options. So I think that a lot of the tools that I use for creating scenarios and things like that are going to, and developing them, are going to really apply broadly to a larger spectrum of people. But it's certainly worth discussing the players on all ends. So do we want to talk about, say, the players who want the simpler, more stripped down, just roll the skill checks type investigation first? Because that's simpler to adjudicate, or do we want to talk more about sort of the structure of how you build one of these things in general?
I would say that overall, making sure that people start off by figuring out what their players want, because you can follow us down these hints and then find out they don't want that. But beyond that, what do you think? Do you think that just the skill check one, just first to get it out of the way, because it won't use many of the same kind of tips as the other ones?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because it's more simplified and things like that. And just in terms of these player archetypes, society play tends to try to aim more toward that middle ground.
Mm-hmm. Give us a little bit of something for everybody. And
yeah.
We're certainly not saying that you won't roll skill checks in one of the other variants. In fact, those are usually a major part of the mystery. But some people want not just a skill check to see if their character found clues or recalled a piece of forgotten lore that was part of the mystery, but just literally like, let me roll this check to solve the mystery. Or, with these clues, my character is an investigator. I should be able to figure this out just by rolling an intelligence check.
So it's the difference between talking to someone and rolling like a bluff or diplomacy or something else check, because there's a particular piece of information that you're trying to convince them to tell you, or someone who may want to go up to that person, roll the check, and then receive the relevant information without that step of deciding what they wanted to ask first, or deciding like how they were going to approach them.
Right, and it's a little bit different too, because if you can convince a player, one of the key tips that we both use for like a player who doesn't really just wanted to roll diplomacy, that sort of thing you're talking about there, is to ask, well, what's your tactic? You don't have to say it in character, but how are you going to convince the king to send troops? And if you say, well, the orcs might attack, maybe that's my tactic. Well, the king hates orcs and you got an advantage. Or king's secretly in love with an orc and that gives you a disadvantage. You don't know. You need to say. The problem is with an investigation, if you ask someone that, they're like, well, I'm going to put together the clues and the list of suspects and figure out who's the correct suspect. And maybe that's something that you wanted them to do in real life. Maybe that is exactly what needs to be done, and they want to do it with the skill check. Possibly the rest of the group wants to do it with thinking. So actually, let's talk about, maybe we should talk about mismatches first.
Sounds
what do you
good.
think?
Yeah.
So what if you have one person in your group who's, my character is a 40 intelligence investigator, I should just be able to solve it, and everybody else wants to do the investigation. So in that case, one possible tip is to say, alright everybody, let's say that this investigator guy comes up with some of these ideas that you guys are coming up with, but I want to hear from all of the players what your thoughts are. So that's one way to let other people try to solve and be like, but actually, you know, it was your 40 intelligence investigator who thought of some of these things first.
Because that still preserves the story of the character who is really good at this thing is the character who in the story does that, but then the players who want to figure it out can figure it out. And I find that...
Rather than your mystery-solving player who's playing a 5 intelligence Nagaji who somehow solves the mystery, you can have that player help the investigator's character.
And this is a kind of thing that can vary from group to group, right? Because some groups want to say that, like, if they as the player are the one who figured something out, that they want their character to be the one who figures it out. But if you have a dramatic mismatch between like character ability and what the players and like the player's interest, and you want to like help to acknowledge the fact that some characters may be better at certain things and let them shine, then this can be an interesting tool to put on the table and play around with.
If you have the mismatch of person who, no, I'm going to solve it, no hints, versus hints, let's go on, you could come up with a subplot that involves the other characters and just send that person off to do the puzzle while you keep playing with the other characters about something else. if you can find an interesting or good subplot to do. Maybe while that person is putting together the clues, the others get into a combat of some kind or something else that's fairly engaging and hopefully will take time that the very slowly solving it person. This doesn't work if those other people really, really wanted to do the mystery, but they needed a hint to move forward. Unless you work well with the person who's not there to bring them back in once they've figured out the next step. So it can get a little tricky if your group is off keel, but in both cases, there's something you can do.
And another thing that you can bring to bear on this is having ways to communicate that aren't out loud. So, for example, using a chat program or passing notes or things like that, so that people can continue. Chat program is usually what we use. So people can continue to have that discussion and be as involved as they want while other things are going on. So then people can pop in and out as they want to, and if they think, oh, these people are taking too long, I'm just ready for another hint, then maybe there could be something else that they're being engaged in. And it could be as big as a combat, but if you're looking at a smaller amount of time, it could also be like a role playing engagement or a chance to start talking about. So you guys are about to level up. What kind of things might you take on the next level? Or like maybe it's a time to order food, or pretty much any other sort of thing that occupies.
You are up to date on your persona phases, are you?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you get them up to date. So you can handle mismatches, but let's go back and talk about this. Your players are united. Mm-hmm. They're okay that you want a mystery plot, but they just want to roll a skill check with their characters for everything. They don't want to have to do analysis or critical thinking for the mystery plot. So, Linda, what are your top tips for handling that situation where that's what the players want to do, period?
Mm-hmm. So I think it also comes down to how engaged are they in the story? Because story engagement and desire to pick through the pieces themselves are not necessarily the same thing. So if they're still rather engaged in the story, you can have the story evolve. You can have the story come out slowly as they roll certain skill checks. I do find that like the player who doesn't necessarily want to solve things does tend to be a little more likely to be the player who's not as interested in the fine details of the story. So it's also important to keep an eye on their level of interest. So you give the top level pieces of information. You start to sprinkle in some of those other features and see if they're interested in that, or if that's something that they want to run down. Like if you give one big clue first and then they're like, oh, well, that's kind of cool, maybe they'll want to follow up on that. As opposed to, so like doing the structure with the focus on the large clues, the possibility to tangent into some of the smaller ones if they're interested, rather than just giving them the entire solution right away. Also, it's also the same things that apply more in general for mysteries. One of the things that definitely applies here is still having a variety of skill checks and ways to approach things. So even if they're solving everything with skill checks, making a variety of skill checks gives them some kind of choice. Like maybe they want to, it's like, okay, well, do you want to try to talk your way past this person, or do you want to sneak in? So you can still give them choices to shape the narrative, even if they're not interested in specifying a lot of detail about what they're doing to solve the mystery.
Also, another trick you can use in this situation, if you feel, maybe I wouldn't be satisfied if it was just, int check, okay, next thing, okay, skill check, okay, next thing. I want it to have a little bit more of a plot. What you can do is offer them obvious leads at the beginning with no check. Just like, here's some obvious leads. And then those obvious leads lead to potentially obvious places that you don't have to do any thinking about what to do. When you get there, there's a fight with another clue that is just there, or there's an obvious skill check. It's like, oh, this lead is to convince this guy to tell us something. And then at the end, all the clues, you don't have to even necessarily make them put it together. You can just, you could either give them this check all the way at the end. It's like, you've gathered all the clues. Great, roll an intelligence check if that's what they want to do. Or have some kind of other agency that's in there. There's at least one published adventure that I'm running right now that has a lieutenant of the guard who is working with you. To avoid spoilers, it's quite a lieutenant, but as a lieutenant who's working with you, you could just have that character be like, oh, well, you guys found a lot of clues. I'll check it out. Oh, with all those clues, it seems like evidence is pointing towards blah. And then you don't have, the players just are basically following, in this version, they're following the breadcrumbs you sent them without having to really think about it, because you sent them on directly to places. And they still feel like they're picking because you maybe could send, it's like, oh wow, well there's these 7 leads, which one do you want to do?
Yeah, exactly. And in that case, the focus of the story, the investigation is going on in the background, and the focus is the challenging work of gathering the evidence. I think one of the things this gets back to is that the most important, consequential, decision-filled, and interesting thing that's happening should be the thing that the PCs are doing. So if the PCs don't want to get super involved in the investigation from the putting things together part, then that's kind of just a thing that happens once all the evidence is in place. And yeah, gathering the evidence is the real, the way that PCs do is the real thing. Whereas if the PCs are like on the opposite end of the spectrum and they're super engaged in piecing things together, then solving the mystery itself is the challenging thing. And oh my gosh, the NPCs aren't up to the task because they don't have as full of an understanding of the situation.
At best, they're just gathering the evidence.
At the best, they're just like doing some of these tasks where you send them off to gather evidence, because maybe gathering some evidence in the back alley isn't quite as interesting as piecing everything together.
I think that's generally a great way to think about NPCs, is they can do the scut work, but that varies from group to group what the scut work is that nobody else wants to do.
Yes, exactly.
So just have the NPCs do the things nobody wants to do, so that the PCs can focus on the things they want to play.
In the same way that pre-generated Kyra kind of becomes the default for Pathfinder Society tables, because it's like, well, I'm sure not going to disrupt anyone if nobody's got healing, and I GM PC this healer to fill the table. So it's just sort of like, what do people not want to do? Then that's what the NPC does. Yeah.
GM Reckless offers the following tip. Maybe offer them a description of the clues they found, a bit of how they've handled it, and the smaller solution they came up with based on their role. Encourage them to discuss in character. That could be a way to try to get them out of their shell, especially if you want to move them towards doing a little bit more analysis, but they are kind of afraid to do that or just don't want to do that. But even if you don't encourage them to discuss it in character, the first parts of GM Reckless's tip are good no matter what you're going to do. So I think that those are all really solid, and particularly in terms of the organized play author or developer, I would say anything where you can build the framework like the one I mentioned, where there's obvious leads and you just do the thing in the leads, and then those piece together just sort of in a way where you don't have to make a leap, can help.
Yeah.
Certainly Murder on the 30 Mermaid I've talked about before on another Arcane Mark, about how that took like almost 12 hours to run, because
Wasn't it 16 hours?
No, that's how long they said it wasn't.
Oh, that's right.
They said it hasn't taken 16 hours yet.
That's right.
That was how
it was 4 a.m. by the time we were done with that scenario.
Yeah.
Why?
It made it to almost 16 hours, but the problem was that I told them that
the things you put up with when all the players are your friends.
We had some of the players who just wanted to solve it themselves, and the adventure wanted them to move on. And so I just had people not talk to them anymore, because it's like, well, you've tied and your diplomacy didn't work and they don't want to talk to you anymore. It's like, oh, we'll corner one of them in a room and use Intimidate and say, we know you did it. And I was like, can we just... And they're like, well, it hasn't been 16 hours yet. We don't have to rest in character.
It hasn't been 16 hours in real
Out
life.
of character, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's what the 16 hours was. But at any rate, yeah. So either on that side, and also erring on the side of, and this gets into another point, the idea of fail forward, making sure that even if the PCs fail, there's some way to continue.
Yep.
And so if you're doing an investigation with more leads, it may be that when they fail one particular lead, that particular avenue closes off, but other ones open up. In a scenario where you have a tighter band, you are more likely to put in something where, sure, the PCs fail, they can still find out this information, but it takes them longer. And so in that case, these other NPCs will have moved along in this way. There's some, and the secret agent guard who's actually betraying the town and working with the bandits is going to have a few more bandits in that later encounter. So the fail forward idea of like, okay, if the PCs are clever and they solve things, then they can get some additional rewards in the sense that some of the combats or other things later on may be easier. But the plot doesn't come to a screeching halt if we
So
don't.
fail forward is good almost every time in almost every type of adventure. But it is absolutely crucial for the type that we were talking about here, which is the people who just want to roll. Because if you're having them solve it, and they haven't solved it, the next thing they can do is try to solve it more.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have them roll, and they fail the roll, and that was your only thing you were going to have them do, you better have a fail forward, where it's like, okay, unfortunately you couldn't piece it together, and then the murderer killed someone else, and now there's this new clue, roll again.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to fail forward if you're only rolling.
There is a scenario that follows that model. I don't want to give any spoilers, but we definitely have done one of those types of things where, depending on how quickly you figure things out, more people may or may not die.
That has definitely happened multiple times.
Yes.
At least one of which you wrote.
Yes.
Yes.
I was actually not thinking about the one I wrote.
Yeah,
but
I know which one you were thinking about.
Yeah.
Probably the one Eleanor wrote.
Actually, I was thinking about the other one.
Oh, okay, the other one.
Okay, there's a lot of scenarios like this, is the point
The
now.
point is, it's very common that you figure it out anyway, but only after, and it claims another victim. That's the way to do it in published adventures.
And then when it claims another victim, then there's a lot more clues that pop out, so there's more chances to figure things out. But so that's the general idea: is it's always still better to succeed, but you don't get locked out of the adventure, and you can still succeed in the long term.
Yep. So that is the check group. And just in case it wasn't clear, all of these, I think we said it sort of, but all of these are very valid play styles that some groups want to play.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I'm kind of a fan of the let's solve it, and if everyone gets stuck, let's give somewhat of a clue. I mean, usually when I play, we haven't gotten stuck, but...
Was anyone in the chat surprised that Mark likes solving mysteries? I doubt it.
maybe they're like, well, you know,
Mark doesn't seem like he likes to play around with systems and figure out why they tick and how they work.
Alright, it looks like What Do You Do pods and Arcane are not even a little bit surprised whatsoever. So,
congratulations, you correctly answered the first question on the How Well Do You Know Mark Seifter quiz.
There are certainly like mystery rules. Like one of our players, it was actually the same player who made the rogue with all of the skill focuses that we talked about last time. He had his law of role-playing games, which is that if you want anyone to pick up on any amount of foreshadowing that you would possibly do, you need to go past the point where you think you've actually directly stated it and state it 10 times more obvious than that. And then they might pick up on your foreshadowing. And then that was like, we called it his last name's law, because he called it that.
Yeah.
And then his corollary was, if Mark's in your group, you need to go 1/10 of the amount that you normally would do, that you thought was reasonable, and not just obvious.
Because
if you want him to not pick up, if you want him to not pick up on your foreshadowing.
I mean,
it's just there are a lot of, I don't know, maybe it's from reading too much Wheel of Time and similar books that are just full of foreshadowing. But when I was younger, but I generally, if a GM is trying to give me foreshadowing, even if it's kind of vague, I tend to pick up on the foreshadowing they're attempting to give.
I mean, also, like, you watch movies and TV shows with him, like, eventually it just has to be like, don't tell me anything you think about this show, no matter how obvious you think it is, because there's a good chance that the thing that you think is dead obvious is something I haven't picked up on yet. Let me be the one to broach the subject of things I've figured out.
I can sometimes get confused by that. Like, for instance, alright guys, sorry, spoilers for Sixth Sense if you still haven't seen it. But I was watching Sixth Sense, it was way after the movie was out, but it was with half the people had already seen it, and half the people hadn't, and I was one of the people who had not seen it. So I was starting to watch it, and like the twist happened. Okay, I'm just going to tell you all, if you haven't watched it, sorry, he's dead in the movie. So, like, right after he got killed and was going around, I was like, so he's dead, right? And then the people who had watched it were like, shut up! What? I didn't understand what they were saying, because it seemed like it was trying to say that he was dead. And somehow the other people who literally heard me say that, because we were all talking while we were watching it, who were also new to the film, were still surprised at the end. Even though I had said that, when the other people said shut up, they thought I was just wrong or something. I don't know. They're like, whoa, he was actually dead. Like
Yeah.
Mark said at the beginning, we forgot about that because it seemed unreasonable.
Well, that was a good squirrel.
That was a
Unfortunately,
good squirrel. We don't have the squirrel
emojis
emoji.
yet.
It's just not approved yet. Wouldn't it be funny if we got approved like in the middle of the stream?
That would be funny.
Yep, we don't have the squirrel emoji, but
Hopefully next time.
we can do this random fish. Here's the fish. But we have it pending, and it should be ready for sure by next time because we're off Thursday for 4th of July.
Arcade Mark, the movie seer, indeed.
Ooh, I spoil all by accident. I thought it was clear that he was dead. It was just because he got shot. It was in like a really bad place, and then the very next cut, he was okay, and he had no wounds. And I knew it was like a movie about ghosts. So I don't know. Anyway, the point is, you can have a wide.
Yes, it's a pride fish.
You can have a wide spectrum of players who run the gamut in foreshadowing, and you should know your group and know our player's law and his corollary. Because if your group always picks up on your foreshadowing, then you can give very vague foreshadowing. And if your group doesn't pick up on anything, you might need to clobber them if you want to give them more
So
foreshadowing.
how do you figure out if how much your players are picking up on, particularly if they're folks that you don't necessarily know well? One of the tools that can be super useful to this, and just to keeping people's information organized well in general, is to have handouts and other references that you can give to players. So like if they're investigating something that's a social thing, you might have something that we've had in some Pathfinder Society scenarios where you have you'll have this is this person's name, and here's what you know about them to start with an obvious space to fill in things that they know. So providing them with nice handy dandy sheets where they can write down and record things, and also just kind of encouraging them to talk to each other. I mean, we've discussed this on the show before about how listening to player chat is one of the most useful things that you can do as a GM to gauge how it's going, who's engaged, who's not, what are they figuring out, what are they not figuring out, and what is exciting them the most. And so that definitely goes for mysteries as well, particularly for the what are they figuring out and are they engaged in this level of detail.
Let's talk about the usual follow-up to player chat, which is usually in player chat, it's like, oh, well, if you hear something from players that is cooler than what you already had, then you steal that idea and the player turns out to be right retroactively. In mysteries, that can be harder to do, and but it can be fun as long as you make sure it actually matches at least enough of the clues that you had out or what you're ready to do. It depends on how well you can improvise. If you're like, oh, yeah, their idea that it was a mermaid is really cool, but I had nothing planned for the docks or the water area at all. They were going to go inland. You may need to pivot hard to
Good
do
point.
that.
Be careful when you do that, because it is a lot harder to shift all the pieces, and you may end up in a place where the pieces don't fit together anymore, and then you're in trouble. So
Also, if they immediately solve the mystery, you may be tempted to pivot it into not being right, but you probably shouldn't do that unless you are getting a situation where your players consistently immediately solve your mystery and tell you, wow, we wish we didn't keep consistently immediately solving your mysteries. We kind of want to do a mystery adventure, not you tell us the mystery and then we say, oh, it was this guy, and then... You want a situation where your players want you to do that before you should even consider that, because just in general, it's not good to take things away from your players, especially if they figured it out for good reason from very vague foreshadowing that you put in.
But it could be the case, for example, that then they figure out that this person is very important and in the overall scheme, and there's a lot, and they can take down a criminal operation and things like that. But maybe there is someone then who's higher up that they can go after, and they've got the clues to go after them too. If you just like the whole, like, if the PCs storm into the BBEG's room and then beat them up, make sure that success matters, but it is still okay to have, like, sort of that next level up that's that lead into something.
Right, and it's like the layers and onions in a cult, but also that fits with the idea of, like, what if the players kill an NPC that's supposed to do something important? You can try to find someone else that can fill that hole. So,
Okay, and one said a succubus controlling the tribe his players were trying to befriend. They tried to kill the succubus before and it escaped. They were new and not good at foreshadowing, so I didn't change the succubus's name. One of the players outright said, "Wait, isn't that the same name as the succubus from 2 sessions ago?" They presumed to ignore this for the whole session and were then surprised when they found out it was the succubus at the end of it all.
that's basically the same thing that happened with me in Sixth Sense, so it happens.
Or that is a perfect example of just because you think it's obvious, it may not indeed be obvious. But you know what? There can be a lot of satisfaction in that moment of realizing, oh, even sometimes, especially when you realize, like, oh, I should have figured that out. Oh my gosh, it all makes sense now. All the pieces are melding together. So, you know.
Yep.
Yes, Kothval, Mark says Kothval is a literal treachery demon and couldn't be bothered to make up a gnome name.
He's not just any Glabrezu. He's like really badass Glabrezu, and he still couldn't be bothered to even make up not his true name.
Yeah, I wound up feeling the need to explain that in a later scenario. It's like, yeah, he's kind of been trapped here for a while, and he's lost his touch, and he just doesn't care anymore, and he's just really arrogant. But that's kind of like, yeah.
Yep. There's a lot of fun possibilities for foreshadowing, to be sure, especially if you follow our tips from the New Beginnings and you're writing your own campaign or hooking people into an adventure path or bigger campaign. You can, once you have met with the players and you sort of know where things are going, you can start sprinkling in clues sort of right from the beginning of something weird that's going on, so that when it eventually comes out, people might be more likely, oh yeah, rather than, what?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk, so we did talk about skill checks. Let's talk about now, like, mysteries where the players are trying to solve the mysteries. And we've started going into that from the direction of, some of the direction of the comments we've just made.
Yeah,
so, but let's go deeply into how do you design a mystery adventure that is made for your players to solve. And we mentioned in previous sessions the famous rule of 3, where you have 3 different ways to get any piece of information that is absolutely crucial for the plot to move forward. If you have a fail-forward method, you don't necessarily need 3. If it's if that piece of information is just something that's like, no matter what the PCs do, they're gonna get it. It's just a question of when. The rule of 3 is if you don't use fail forward, because if you don't use the rule of 3, they might miss it, and if it's crucial, it's crucial. Also, as we mentioned in previous streams, if it's for something optional or that just gives you extra treasure or just a little side advantage and is not crucial to move forward the mystery or the plot, you don't need to use the rule of 3 for that.
So I think this gets into also the concept of sort of major revelations and minor revelations, where major revelations are those big things you really want to make sure that the characters recognize by the end of the mystery, and minor revelations are cool other facts they could figure out that could help give them more context into motivation or other people who may be connected and things like that. And in that case, the minor revelations in and of themselves are those pieces of information act as another type of reward in an investigation. It's not just treasure or XP, it's also information, insight, understanding into why the situation is the way that it is.
Because players who like to play mysteries often enjoy those kind of rewards of enriching the setting, finding out more than just necessarily what they needed to learn. So, what do you do, Pod's asking, what is the rule of 3 again? The rule of 3 is very simple. Basically, if there is something you absolutely need the PCs to find for the mystery, make sure there are 3 distinct ways to get at it. And that doesn't just mean say the same thing 3 times to them with increasingly italics in your voice as you're saying it, because that still may not help them. Like, if it was the mermaid from before, it was just like, something's fishy here. They're like, what? The sailor said something's fishy here. What? The sailor said something's fishy here. That's not 3. That's one thing.
It's one
that
thing
you just said in a really weird way.
Archime's
Yeah,
linked to the original
I think
article,
the
yeah.
Alexandrian is the original article on the 3-clue rule, but
Thanks, Archive.
in general, you want 3 different ways to get something that is absolutely important that the entire mystery solves on. And some adventure or even some systems are based around the idea of make sure they can't miss the must-hit clues. I mean, like that's the entire point of like the Gumshoe system.
Yeah.
The Gumshoe system that's used for Trail of Cthulhu and is it Lore Finder? It's one of the finders.
I'm blanking.
But
there's a lot of finders.
Ooh,
wow, thank you, Rex
a
Lickett.
surprisingly helpful unicorn. Thanks so much.
Yay!
Yeah, there's a few Gumshoe-based systems that their entire point of the system is saying that you build the adventure so that the PCs can't possibly miss the clue. Now, it is actually not true that you can't possibly miss them in Gumshoe because Gumshoe also recommends splitting the party. And you set some clues require certain skills, but you're only allowed to put them there if someone in the party has them. And you could split the party in a way where they don't find them, but they sure are close to making it so you can't possibly miss the clues in Gumshoe. In Pathfinder with Fail Forward, you can do that as well. But having a rule of 3, doing it 3 different ways, also helps in case the PCs just decide not to pursue something. Which, even when we went back to our group of PCs who just wanted to roll, and we said, oh, just give them 7 leads. They might just decide, oh yeah, we know these are 7 important leads, but we're not going to do this lead. We have to go into the swamp.
Ooh, we got a new follower, too. Thanks, Boyd Stevenson.
Thanks for following.
Welcome.
So, don't even assume that even if you directly tell people these are the main leads, that they will actually do all of the leads. And that's another reason that you might want to try putting in multiple paths.
And to expand a little bit more on how the same person saying something seems fishy here 3 times it wouldn't really count as 3 different things. Also, similarly, talking to one NPC who you can talk to using bluff or diplomacy or intimidate. Like, yes, there's 3 ways you can approach that one NPC, but it's still talking to that NPC. It's still one course of action. And so it would still sort of count as one
Also,
approach.
it's one failure point, because if the PCs kill the NPC after will you be my friend? Diplomacy. No. Alright, you're dead.
I think failure points is a really excellent way to conceptualize what is a different option in the rule of 3.
If you can think of a single failure point that takes away all 3 of the things that you thought were 3 different things, then they probably aren't 3 different things.
So there's another question from Da Propaganda.
Okay.
Any advice on investigation scenarios where the NPC the players are talking to reacts to specific names or phrases and the PCs will just not say them, either by not remembering or by just missing? Well, that like they've literally been point blank told, and you as the GM are thinking something like, okay, the character would definitely remember this. The players just aren't remembering this because our last session is a month ago. Then a tool that I often use is sort of the, and this is first edition Pathfinder, is the like sort of skill check to recall the thing that you've previously been told. So that could be like, sort of a flat intelligence or wisdom check, or it could be like an arcana check if it was arcana based type thing. Because then it doesn't feel as much like you're just telling them the thing. It's sort of like, oh yeah, you succeeded this check. You remember that you were told this thing in the past. Yes.
It also depends on how they're missing it, though.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like, if they've literally been flat out told, and you think they're just forgetting because they
like sometimes you'll know because, like, let's say, for instance, the mermaid thing, where they're like, oh yeah, it might be that mermaid person, but the person you're questioning only responds if you say Ariel, and then you could be like, oh, roll a society check or something. You remember her name was Ariel, but it could just be that for some reason they're talking to this person. And they don't mention mermaids or Ariel or anything. They only want to talk to this person about bread.
Yeah.
And they just don't bring up even remotely the topic that you need.
Yeah.
That you want them to, especially if it's a published adventure. And it's like, if they say anything about mermaids or Ariel, or then the character says, oh no, I will never go near the water. Mermaids are evil. They drink your blood. But then they're just like, no, what kind of bread do you sell, baker?
Oh, Nemesaur Gnome is now following too. Welcome, Nemesaur Gnome.
We've got more followers.
So So yeah, so I guess this gets into a few different things, because to clarify, what I was going for was more like like an NPC says, okay, when you go to this place, you need to be sure to say that the passphrase is walrus.
Oh, okay.
And then like you forgot the passphrase was walrus.
I was more thinking of NPCs that have like a little thing in the adventure that says if they mention mermaids, then
yeah,
give them this clue, and then they just won't. Be like, sourdough is my favorite bread, Mr. Baker. Can you make us 50 English muffins? Well, we don't have English muffins. Oh, how about Talden muffins? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if that NPC is sort of a planted operative, they may be kind of wondering what the PCs are up to and trying to figure out if the PCs are the people that they're trying to talk to. And then so, they may go a little more into like, oh yeah, strange things out on the sea lately. Or things like that to try to guide it toward that direction. But it may also, but if it gets too heavy-handed, then that clue may just be one of the rule of 3 options that you strike off the list and they move on to something else. Night Fox points out sometimes we have trouble keeping various NPCs straight, and this is where having resources to keep them straight can be really, really useful. So this can be something that is GM generated. Like I know a lot of GMs like to use like face cards that they put up for each NPC, having references that'll have like the names of the NPCs and a few facts about them that you can distribute. Or if you have a player who's engaged who can get into who can get into constructing notes and things like that. So, for example, for our War for the Crown game, Mark has his GM version of the NPCs, and then I maintain a GM page on the on our sort of player wiki, where I put down what do we as players know about the NPCs, and so that way there's always this sort of there's careful division between the GM's knowledge and what do the players know about the NPCs.
Plus fun rumors and untrue facts, such as the many facts about the Night Swan.
Yes. So it's good to have somebody who is a player note taker, or barring that, to have GM taking notes. So like for my Kingmaker campaign, for example, nobody was particularly taking that role, so I just made pages on our wiki that just said the things that I knew for a fact that the players had been told, and then the understanding is that any player can come on and update that if they want to put more information on there, things that they suspect or things that they've deduced. But that's just sort of the, who is this NPC, what's the overarching view, what are the things you're really going to need to know about them that your character's definitely figured out by this point.
I was using my usual note-taking method, but doesn't produce anything that would be helpful for the other players.
Yes, your usual note-taking method of remembering things.
Well, I mean, sometimes I scribble some kind of very minor things that make sense to me, but are useless for anyone else also. Mm-hmm. That or just remembering things.
Group wiki is a really interesting idea. Have you guys talked about it before and I just missed it? I'm sure it's come up casually in various things.
I think it's come up casually, but we haven't said like as a tip, get a group wiki. We just have a group wiki.
Yeah, so we use ShoutWiki, which is just a free wiki creation service, and we just have a bare bones wiki that we use for it. Yeah, Obsidian Portal. There's a lot of sources out there for it. It's just what we happen to use because that's what we got started with. Well, actually, we got started with an internal wiki while we were both at college at MIT. We used wiki on the MIT servers. They had a really good free wiki.
But then when we were no longer, actually no, it got moved while we were at MIT and had to migrate into. Yeah. And so we had to pull off the pages.
And so we pulled off all the pages and moved them into a different one. But yeah, that's what we use. And then everybody in the gaming group has their own account. They can see and edit and everything.
Yep. That's how we figure out what people's persona stats are and all sorts of random maps of the area.
Yeah, and we can post up stuff too. So we'll post up like the maps and the images and the NPC pictures and things like that show up, and you can sort of use that as a quick reference to, hey, did you forget what was going on here? Check this page. We also maintain our party treasure through the wiki as well.
We also have definitely used Google Forms, as people mentioned, like Google, or not Google Forms, Google mentioned Google Docs. We've used that, and Google, what is ever the name of the Google spreadsheet thing
Google
is.
Sheets, yeah, we've used that for really large treasure hauls to decide like. We've done things where like we just got behind on selling treasure, and we were 4 sessions deep of treasure that we hadn't figured out what to do with, and we didn't want to have a large section of a session that was dedicated to it. So like we just made a list of all the treasure items and then had all the players' names across the top, and then it was like vote, keep or sell.
Yep.
And if you want to keep it, do you want this item for your character? And then we just did boom, and then after that was all in. I just took care of the logistics of that, and then we only had conversations about like the 3 or 4 items that some people wanted to sell and some people wanted to keep.
we definitely, in Jade Regent, we did not follow our own advice from this stream about using group XP, and we had individual XP, mainly because we wanted to figure out how the NPCs leveled up. We had a giant wiki that I'll say, not wiki, a giant Google sheet, which I will say this. I can now remember every encounter that we had in Jade Regent because the names of the encounters are at the top of each column in the sheet. But the Google Sheet definitely helped with that if you want to do something complicated like that. And it looks like David from the chat says, Adventure Budget Meeting, Murder Hobo Inc. There definitely, like, some groups have meetings about treasure group charters. We mentioned the Rise of the Rune Lords group had a really kind of sketchy group charter that did not work so well for some of the people. Squirrel.
I just typed squirrel because we are heavy duty squirrels.
Yeah, well, we're going off into things you can use to keep track of your campaign, and to be honest, in a mystery, that is a good way to help keep track of clues. Also, we're talking about how can you figure out if your players have figured out your foreshadowing and your clues.
Yeah.
If you have players who actually will do the wiki, and you look at what they've put in the wiki, you can tell if you're like, wow, this is a really low quality wiki of the clues that I put up. It's got all this random stuff that's wrong and almost none of my foreshadowing. Then you know that they aren't getting your foreshadowing. Whereas if you're like, whoa, yeah, this has it has a quote mysterious foreshadowing section with lists all my foreshadowing with it. This probably means that it's that succubus from last session or whatever Arcane was saying with there.
Yeah.
Then you know, oh, well, then they probably figured it out. So certainly having a sheet like that you can check will also let you know what your players are up to. Unless the GM is the one who has to keep the wiki, then you don't really learn anything because the GM is putting up Chekhov's notes, which actually helps the players learn some things.
Yes.
But
that could be, and that could certainly be useful for a group that's more on the that's more on the light. In terms of how much they want to be involved in figuring out the steps of the investigation themselves. Another thing you can do is ask the players, so what clues do you think are important? Like what things like that. So then you can at least use that as guidance for what you put up, and then it's not that then you don't have, because I guess like Chekhov's clue list could be very frustrating for the player who wants to figure out things on their own. It's like, gee, I wonder why the GM only wrote up like these 5 things from everything we talked about this session and not anything else.
Night Fox is mentioning kids, running for kids. Linda, do you have any tips of running a mystery or investigation adventure for kids?
Oh yeah. Okay. So first of all, just the same general thing with any kids adventure with tone, and the way that things are presented. How dark is the mystery versus how silly or light or things like that.
Who took the missing
things? Yeah. So for a kid's mystery, it's, I'm not going to be doing like, this is a murder mystery, guys. It's going to be more of like, hey, you know what? This is a mystery that's based around a theft or like or a disguise or some other thing that's going to be more lighthearted, particularly with the younger set. And then after that, I would say that I have a mystery kids adventure that I've run, the mystery of the Case of the Disappearing Wizards, where the idea is that all the PCs are various familiars of wizards who have all vanished and they're not really sure where they went. And like in the end, none of the wizards really get hurt or anything like that. But for that, I only have a few things that I know that are true, and then I have a lot of ways. So not just 3 ways. I have like 6 or 7 ways that I know they could proceed. And then I'm open for them to come up with ways to proceed. So I have fewer pieces, but more branches and more flexibility in how they reach those, so that their solutions are a lot more likely to succeed.
And that flexibility, another good point for kids, and possibly the childish at heart, non-kids, is if you wind up with someone, because some kids would be fine being prodded. Some kids don't want to be prodded and they get impatient. We didn't talk about people who have both situations, like, let me solve it, but also I'm impatient. So whether they're a kid or not, one solution you could do is to just have them be right with whatever they said. Like, they come up with it like, all right, well, it looks like there was a sign on the door that says, Rakshasas, Oh, there's a bunch of people who are tigers with hands backwards that have been seen going in and out, which we have identified as being Rakshasas. We're in a clearly India-based place, and
Which is known to be the most common place to find Rakshasas.
And the innkeeper keeps glaring anytime that we are carrying around that holy arrow near him and says, "Stop! Keep it away from me! I'm a Rakshasa." But then the kids are like, "Okay, it's sharks, but we're in the desert." "No, it's sharks!" And they go, "Oh yes, there were sharks. They came up from under the ground, and they painted fake Rakshasa clues everywhere, and it was sharks." So.
Or you know, oh yes, it's like, yes, there are Rakshasas, but the reason there were Rakshasas here is because they were trying to figure out, because they really liked sharks, and they wanted sharks to take off in the desert. So the Rakshasas were stealing money so that they could create a giant shark pit, and then they could have a giant shark show. And
they're
so
shark-headed Rakshasas.
Yeah.
Also, you can't spell the word Rakshasa without the word shark, although it's in different order.
So, I guess, like, the extent to which you do that, the extent to which you bend, like, you know, bending for younger players more so than... Because I could definitely see a lot of adult players be like, okay, seriously, if you did that. But, like...
In fact, the first 5 letters of shark are the same as the first 5 letters of Rakshasa.
Oh, man, No Heart the Shark approves.
No Heart the Shark approves of Sharkshasas.
What about were-sharks? Could they be involved in this plot too?
Maybe. But even if they're adult players, if they legitimately don't think it's Rakshasas and legitimately think that it is sharks, and are getting frustrated, like, no, but it must be sharks.
Yeah, no.
Then you probably could do that
yeah,
for adult players.
That's as long as, like, it's not just the one player who's like, it's definitely Sharkshasas, but, like, it's the majority of the players.
If the whole group thinks that, but is also getting frustrated, you could just make, it, like we said before about making them be right because they're overhearing them in chat, and it's an interesting idea. Even if it's a really bad idea, you could still, and I'm not saying Sharkshasas is a bad idea, you can make them be right just to stop them from being frustrated.
But again, the more implausible it is, the more work it's going to take to fit things together behind the scenes. So this could be a good opportunity for a break in the game while you try to figure things out, or even, like, you know, to run a few more encounters that are not necessarily related immediately to figuring out it's the Sharkshasas, but so that then you have the session break to sort of figure, okay, how do I make this have been Sharkshasas all along, seriously?
Or maybe it's boulets.
Or boulets, yeah, that's it.
In the middle it's the
land sharks. That's how you bridge the gap.
That's how it's in the desert. But I don't know how they created all this mystery and intrigue that the Rakshasas were supposed to do, since they're big, lumbering, unintelligent.
Hey, not all boulets are necessarily unintelligent. You have a super intelligent boulet.
Alright, it's a boulet psychic lich.
It's a boulet psychic lich. Or it's like a boulet wizard or sorcerer who has, like, a project image, or some kind of, like, servant who's also a doppelganger who's working for them.
It's the boulet psychic lich who is the one who brings together all the boulets that are in published adventures that are in groups. Even though we've published that they never ever associated in larger groups.
Oh yeah, but
using mind control.
Yes. Or oh my God, baby boulets. Do 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 do. Baby boulet. Do 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 do. Baby boulet. Do 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 do. Baby boulet.
All right, so we've got.
All right, you got baby shark stuck in my head again. Congratulations,
guys. We've got
guys.
squirreled again by baby boulet, but
that was a pretty impressive squirrel, though.
I think that the kids' question was a really good question from Red Fox, but moving back to non-kids, just not doing a weird thing, just they wanted a mystery adventure. Linda, do you have any...
What do you do, Potts? Why are you not proud of yourself for bringing up Baby Shark?
Linda, do you have any good tips for just, other than the rule of 3, for just running an adventure where the PCs are going to solve it themselves?
Yeah, sure. So I think that... because it's stuck in your head too, what do you do, Pods? Well, all I have to say is you brought that on yourself.
I don't even know what this is.
You haven't seen Baby Shark?
No.
I think I'm going to have to show him Baby Shark after this.
This is probably going to happen now. I shouldn't have admitted it. But
you shouldn't have. But we're doing this. We're watching Baby Shark after this, and you're totally not going to get it, and you're going to give me the what the hell face, and it's going to be great. Anyway, so where was I? So yeah, when I was talking about sort of like the major revelations and the minor revelations, having these smaller things that they can figure out along the way that aren't necessary but can help them discover things. So sort of major and minor revelations, and also sort of major and minor clues that you expect to be those bigger revelations that carry the more weight, that help you discover the main things. So you can have, big clues that lead to answer, and you can also have minor clues that help you reach big clue. And which of these are which also can be a little bit more flexible, because if you have a group that is, if you have your, super foreshadowing, I'm figuring out everything group, then something that you expected was going to be more of a minor clue that maybe would lead them to a major clue that would help them put things together, maybe they figure out a lot from it. Or, if you have a group that just isn't figuring things out and something you expected to be a major clue might be more of like a minor clue that you then need to make lead into something that's even more obvious than what you were doing before. But just sort of that structure of smaller clues leading to bigger clues leading to answer is something that can be quite useful.
So here's another one I thought of, which is, hey, it looks like Elftero has gifted a tier 1 sub to What Do You Do Pod.
See,
thanks, Elftero.
Do you still are you still not proud of yourself now that you've gotten a sub? Because I think Elftero approves.
Now you can put in these leshies. Where was I? Oh yes. We got squirreled again.
Oh yeah, we did. I was talking about major clues and minor clues.
When it comes to a group that does want a little bit of prodding, but wants to be able to solve it on their own mostly, I think back to the times that I've run Anagnoresis, because I always run them in convention slots, and the entire thing is basically a very complicated puzzle mystery. But I always have to sort of prod people just a little bit to make sure it runs on time. It's always run almost exactly on time, and the main way I do that, I listen to what people are saying, and I don't necessarily contribute new ideas, but sometimes they will make factual statements that are not true, and as the GM, I feel like people feel, because I've not even asked them if they wanted clues, I just had to give it to them, right? I feel people feel less cheated out of the mystery because the GM is like the Oculus into the world and is the one who reminds them things that their characters would know or would see.
Yes, exactly.
When they say something like, well, we tried all of the things that we could possibly try except for that staircase. I said, well, also you didn't try the dumbwaiter.
Mm-hmm. Or, actually, there was another door out of the library.
Yeah, there's another door out of the library that you've not gone through. And the staircase, you said.
Or if they say, this door, all of the doors here were locked. All of the doors and entrances here were locked, so there couldn't have been any way for them to enter or exit. And they're like, you checked all, it's like, you checked all the doors in the front side of the building, but nobody actually went around the building entirely. So it's sort of like
if they make a false assertion,
yes, exactly,
that their characters might be able to know was not true because they literally said all of them are locked. It's like, well, you only for sure that one and that one are locked.
Yeah.
And then they go check it. Oh, the other one isn't locked. Yes, you kind of gave them it away, but they were the ones who came up with the line of thinking that led to that. They just had wrong information about the world. That if they were really in the world, they probably wouldn't have. So I was talking about how. Since you're the Oculus into the world, you can give even people who don't want hints without it feeling as cheap if it's something that they have just said aloud that they know that they didn't do right.
Yeah.
Or that you know that they didn't do right, and that their characters probably should know that they didn't do right.
I mean, it goes back to the principle of I know we talked about this in the previous episode, the sort of standard example that we talked about in our home group is the example of, if my character is about to walk over a cliff, I should know that my character is about to walk over a cliff, because my character would definitely know they were about to walk over a cliff. They would definitely see that, and they wouldn't do that. And I think it also, goes back to a little bit of allowing retconning when it's clear that the players themselves had an incorrect understanding. And the sooner you can catch those false assumptions and sort of course correct them so that the players and you are speaking the same language, generally the better.
Absolutely. So I say just in general, in a lot of cases, you just be respectful of your players and try to make sure that it's not too intricate or unsolvable of a mystery, and that is one of the most important things to getting it to work out. And the rule of 3 moves towards that. Talking to everybody ahead of time works towards that. Thinking of the way that you'll prod them if you do need to prod a group that mostly doesn't want to be prodded. that works towards that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a group that wants hints, you sort of have to learn to calibrate exactly when and how to drop the hints, and that's something that they can't tell you in a questionnaire at the beginning. You're just gonna have to gauge the temperature.
You can always give them more information later, but you can't take back what you've told them. So start small and build up when it comes to hints.
That is a really good point. All right, so I think we've talked about, in general, a lot of things about mysteries, and we've talked about investigating mysteries. Do you want to give any more hints about investigations that that are not necessarily around mysteries?
Yeah. So it could be the case, for example, that the PCs know what they're trying to prove, so they know the end step, but they need to get enough evidence to prove it to someone else. So, like, let's say that your PCs know that an NPC that know that the noble who rules this particular area is corrupt. They know it, but they don't have the social standing or pull to just go to the governor above the mayor of this city and say the mayor is corrupt, because the governor is going to be like, okay, yeah, well, you said the mayor is corrupt. What am I supposed to do about that? So in that case, they're investigating toward a particular goal, and in that case, the ultimate goal is to gather enough evidence to be able to make the case. Usually then you'll have a situation where the more evidence you gather, the easier it is to make the case in the end. And if you try to make the case a little too early, then you either have a harder check, or you may get sent back out to gather more evidence, or even it may be a little harder for you to convince them in the future, because you might seem like a person who's crying wolf or whatever.
Also, by the way, this is pretty much a great tip for what to do if the players solve the mystery too quickly. If you're in any kind of setting where it's more intrigue and less, well, now we know, so it's over. If the person who done it, is like a noble or someone with enough social standing, they solve it too quickly, you can say, well, great, you guys think that, but the constable and the mayor or the governor or whoever needs more evidence. You can't just say that it has to be the wife of the guy you called in for questioning first, because
it's always the second person.
Because the GM watched Bones too much, and in Bones it's always that random person who comes in for no reason when they question somebody else, or whoever, that second person who they didn't really need in the scene. So they'd be like, that's not enough evidence. You have, in fact, no evidence. They're like, yeah, I know it's that person. Then prove it.
And another point there is, if you as the GM can kind of point out to people, like, yeah, you're convinced of that, but there's not really, in this culture, like, there's not going to be enough evidence to accuse this high-ranking person with that. Then they're not going to feel like the rug is pulled out from under them when the high-ranking person looks at them and is like, those are some pretty hefty accusations you're throwing around. How do I know you're not someone who's involved in this? Particularly if I don't know if this is exactly what David in the chat was implying, but the idea that, like, maybe some of those higher-ups could be complicit in it too, so you could kind of suggest that idea to the PCs. I was like, well, you don't know how high up this goes, so you may want to figure something out. I mean, as long as I generally find that to be the case, that before the PCs really step in it, whether it's like, shouting insults at the Queen's face or anything else that they do, and like, something really bad logically happens if they do this.
Are you sure?
To give the, like, so that's what you're doing type question, and then I feel like if I've given them, like, oh, so that's what you're doing type question, and the PCs are like, yes, we're doing this, ha 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 ha, then it's like, all right, well, it's not my fault. The consequences of the world are going to happen here, but then it's sort of like you working together with the players, and the understanding that the players are thinking it's amusing that something bad may be about to happen to their PCs.
Queen Abigail, you're a tyrant.
Don't do that.
Abdicate.
Don't do that. Unless you're looking for a way to have your PC removed from a campaign, don't do that.
We think that you murdered your own family members to get this position.
And the PC was never heard from again. It seems to have been a fishing accident in which they accidentally slipped out of the boat and no one managed to save them in time. How unfortunate. Yeah, or the college GM reckless. I'll just put them in a zone of truth and force a confession then. I mean, that's also the point to start thinking about how do NPCs regard if you're like, I'm going to accuse you of zone of truth. I'm going to force you into a zone of truth and force you to confess. Like if the NPC is going to be like, the NPC is going to call the guard and be like, yes, excuse me, guards, these strange people broke into my house and have been harassing me. Like, natural consequences of actions, right? Having NPCs behave in a realistic way, and not necessarily allowing the PCs to get away with all the things that PCs think they should be able to do because they're PCs. I mean, that isn't something you want to pull all the time, right? But it can be rather entertaining, and I found a lot of players really enjoy oh, yeah, that totally is what would happen if someone did that, huh?
So Arcane does make the counterpoint about games where the burden of evidence is entirely beyond the evidence available from the mystery, like when the governor is also corrupt and doesn't want to deal with it. It isn't fun if there's no way to solve it.
Yes. Yes, that's true. You want to make sure that there is a realistic way to solve it, or rather, multiple realistic paths to solving it. Or it may be that, they can't figure out the whole thing now, but they can figure out enough of a nugget to know that they're onto something and that they have another way to move for this investigation. If it's something that they're gradually piecing together throughout the whole thing. But that kind of long-term mystery is another thing you definitely want more buy-in for.
So Linda, What Do You Do Pod says, you sounded like a newscaster and now we need to start doing Today in Galarian segments. This just in, Shark Shasas have taken over the island of Jalmaray. News at 11.
No one really knows where they came from, but the first reports of them came from Bob, the NPC that I've decided to name Bob in a parody of bad NPC naming. Excuse me, Bob, what can you tell me about the strange fellows who were commenting about the smell of chum in the water that you saw in the streets yesterday?
No comment, my old chum. After the break, do your children have filth fever?
10 ways to tell. Yeah, I could keep going on with this for a while.
There we go. I wonder if people would, subscribe to watch, fake Galarian news show. Where I could see a Chalice propaganda news show where you wear your Abigail crown and it's just like, here we have Queen Abigail II and some other person.
Today in West Crown, there were some dissidents. They were efficiently dealt with. Speaking of efficiency, let's talk about the history books. The newest copy of the history books has been released. These are all completely accurate. Please destroy any earlier copies. Strange magic has caused earlier copies to become inaccurate. Excuse me, your Infernal Magistrix, is it possible that there were errors in the previous official news? Camera pans to Abigail and you just hear the sound of screaming in the background. Now, as I was saying, since I am and have always been the only host on this show,
there you go. Why do we have a second host anyway? And or you could have alright, well, now the news is over, it's time for our Dear Abby section.
Yes.
So here's our question for you. Dear Abby, my father was telling me that the rebels in Ravenel might have a point. But I think that House Thune is the only true rulers of Cheliax. What should I do?
Well...
Signed, Clueless and Corentin.
Well, Clueless and Corentin, I'm happy to tell you that the government has it all handled and you won't have to deal with any insipid comments from your father ever again. Signed, Abby.
Alright, so there we go. Anyway, I think that we have got sufficiently squirreled onto a Galarian news episode.
Oh, but that was fun, though. But speaking of the squirrel, I'm not quite ready to let this go yet, because actually Luis and Eleanor is a part of the process of helping people internally to understand what the updates are. Actually did put out a Galarian newsletter email that they've been sending around. So maybe
it had a Dear Abby in it.
I think it may have had I think it did have a Dear Abby. Isn't that where you got the idea of the Dear Abby? Anyway, I think it would be awesome if we could convince them to
I've
put them
called
up.
Abigail Dear Abby for years. But
yeah, but It would be cool if we could convince them to put that up somewhere. I think that could be a fun series of lighthearted blogs. Although we need to be redacted a little bit because there are some things in there that they were letting us know about that haven't gone into the books and things like that.
Super secret.
They would know about that more so since they are the World Guide gurus.
All right. So let's say goodbye to YouTube. Maybe we've already said goodbye to them earlier and we just didn't know it depending on where Linda cuts this video. So bye YouTube if you're still here after the edits.
Oh, come on. No, do a real goodbye. Now I have to cut this part out too.
Bye YouTube.